The winding mountain roads of the Blue Ridge Parkway offer a specific kind of solitude at 2 a.m. But for one driver, a late-night trip through these mountains shifted into a lingering trauma dictated by a fog bank that began to systematically dismantle their sense of reality. The transition happened in minutes. A heavy bank of mist rolled over the pass, swallowing the road and dropping visibility to the edge of the hood. The driver was forced to drop to a crawl, navigating the curves by feel rather than sight. Coastal and mountain fog warps your sense of space. Without streetlights or visible landmarks to provide a sense of scale, the driver became entirely dependent on the tiny patch of illuminated asphalt directly in front of the headlights. That patch of light eventually exposed a human silhouette standing on the right shoulder. It was perfectly still. Its arm was raised, held unnaturally stiff, pointing a single finger into the dark, invisible tree line. The driver's heart rate spiked as they eased the car past. They watched the figure through the side window, expecting a movement or a turn of the head, but the entity remained frozen, offering no acknowledgement of the car's presence. 2 miles later, the same figure appeared again, same height, same rigid stance. But this time, it was positioned on the left shoulder, and its arm was pointing directly at the driver's windshield. On a 2-lane road with no cross streets, there was no physical way for a person to have gotten ahead on foot. Panic overrode caution. The driver accelerated, attempting to put distance between themselves and the figure, despite the low visibility. That escape was interrupted by a violent metallic crunch, as something heavy slammed onto the car's roof from above. The driver didn't stop until they reached the bright lights of a gas station miles away. While they tried to dismiss the encounter as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, the evidence was waiting on the trunk. Deep, vertical scratch marks had been carved through the paint, proving that something tangible had been clinging to the vehicle in the dark. Coastal fog often carries a physical weight. In certain conditions, a phenomenon known as white static develops, a mist so dense it absorbs all ambient noise, muffling the environment until the world feels entirely hollow. At 5:30 a.m. in a quiet Oregon cul-de-sac, this silence turned a routine dog walk into an exercise in sensory deprivation. The houses, parked cars, and streetlights were all erased by a solid wall of white. Halfway through the walk, the dog stopped. It stood rigid on the wet sidewalk, the hair along its spine standing straight up as it locked its gaze onto a patch of fog where nothing was visible to the human eye. Then the sound broke through. It was the distinct, wet slapping of bare feet on the asphalt. Someone was walking out there in the mist, and they were trailing directly behind a narrator. Every time the narrator changed their pace, the unseen footsteps matched it. When the narrator stopped to listen, the trailing footsteps took one final, heavy step before falling silent, a deliberate 1-second delay that confirmed they were being mirrored. The entity closed the gap to 10 feet. At that distance, the auditory mimicry shifted from footsteps to something more personal. The entity began perfectly replicating the high-pitched whines of the dog and the specific metallic jingle of its collar. The narrator fled back to the house and threw the deadbolt. When they looked through the door's peephole, the neighborhood was gone. There was only white mist, pressing directly against the exterior glass, as if trying to find a way inside. In this environment, the home loses its status as a sanctuary. The fog dissolves the familiar boundaries of the property, leaving the inhabitant trapped in a small, isolated box, while the sound of a predator continues to circle just inches away. For a night shift security guard at a riverfront industrial yard, fog is a professional hazard. It creates a cloak for intruders and turns a vast open worksite into a series of blind corners. One night, the weather rendered the entire security infrastructure useless. The camera monitors showed only solid white glare, as the infrared sensors and lenses were unable to penetrate the thick river mist. Monitoring the yard became a matter of listening. From the darkness beyond the gate, the guard heard the rhythmic sound of metal dragging across concrete, followed by the wet, heavy sound of low breathing circling the guard booth. The guard drew a heavy-duty flashlight and aimed it into the yard, but the high-lumen beam simply bounced off the mist. It created a disorienting wall of light that blinded the guard while acting as a beacon for whatever was moving in the dark. They retreated into the glass-walled booth and locked the door. The moment the latch clicked, the dragging sound stopped. The yard fell into a sudden, pressurized silence. As the guard stood in the center of the booth, two pale, dirt-caked hands pressed flat against the glass at eye level. A face emerged from the white void, stopping just an inch away from the other side of the window pane. The guard finally identified the source of the dragging sound from earlier. It wasn't a tool hitting the pavement. The metallic, scraping noise was vibrating out of the entity's own throat as it stared through the glass. Fog provides the specific medium required for the impossible. It acts as a bridge, allowing a presence to cross the distance from the distant woods to the immediate proximity of a locked door.